Hello folks, this is my quick and dirty guide to VR settings in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 for both the Pimax Crystal Lite Super and the Quest 3. This is going to be basically everything that I do at the time of this recording. Now please bear in mind that these settings are not the holy grail. These won't completely transform your life either. And I'm not a VR guru. A lot of people think I am for some reason, but I'm not. There's plenty of channels out there that do it better than me. But these are the settings I run with a 4070 Super base system, a 4090 and 5090 running the headsets I've just mentioned. So let's just start with my 5090 settings, and this may shock you, so be warned, because as you can see here, they're not very high, and that's with a 5090 running a AMD 9800 X3D processor. Okay, and that's what I'm running at the moment. So let me just explain a few of these settings, because I'm not going to go too crazy into this. I've done this many times, but in essence, there's certain particular settings that are really important. Of course, the first one is your AA setting. Now, I do prefer TAA mode, and that's one great thing about the 5090 is it can run even a Super at full native resolution. And you'll probably get between 30 and 40 frames per second, which, believe it or not, is okay for flight simulation. It's not okay if you're playing a first-person shooter with lots of fast movement, but for flying, it's fine. But, as I say, we'll go into that in a bit more depth in a moment. But the render scale is also something I would recommend to keep at 100 and adjust the resolution in the VR headset software, that is Pimax Play, because I've always thought this, that the render scaling is in the sim itself. The native render scaling needs to be set at 100 and kept there, because otherwise it just seems to take the performance down in bigger chunks than it would if you take it back in the VR headset software. But that's just my personal opinion. So be careful with these settings here. For a 4070 Super, you won't be able to run TAA mode, really, ideally anyway, with a Super unless you down sample it. So we'll get into that as well, but let's just go through a few of the heavy hitters here, and then and also go through some of the important ones. Of course, since Sim Update 2 has been released, foveated rendering is an absolute godsend for VR, so switch it on, okay? Switch it on, it's a fantastic feature, and it can give you up to 12 frames per second back in VR. Doesn't sound like a lot, actually it is. It's the difference between a 4090 and a 5090. So that little button there is your upgrade to a 5090 if you've got a 4090, okay? Think of it that way. AMD sharpening, that is actually very nice in the distance, but don't go too crazy with it. I keep it at 150, which is actually quite high really, but that's fine. With Sim Update 3 Beta, this probably won't be a setting you can see right now unless you're on the beta. Max frame rate is a really great addition now, because one thing that's really important, I'll just go into this very quickly, is depending upon the refresh rate of your VR headset, it's great practice to try and get half of the frame rate of that refresh rate of your headset. So what I mean by that is, say 90 Hertz, try and aim for 45 frames per second at somewhere like London City. That is quite a tough thing to, achieve though, to be fair, especially in 2024 without DLSS. But if you can get that, or even down to 30 is also okay. But 45 is optimal. That's also quite good as well. And now that we've got this max frame rate setting, we can lock it down. We don't need to go into config files anymore. And this is going to be a bit of a theme for this video, is that in the past I've had to show lots of different things. It's a lot easier nowadays. So for instance, with the Quest 3, I would recommend running at 80 Hertz and knocking this down to 40 frames per second, for example. But that's a really nice feature. Thank you, Sobo, for including that. And yeah, hopefully once Sim Update 3 becomes an actual thing, that's something I would recommend locking it and keeping that frame rate consistency there, because if the frames are going all over the place, then it's no good. You know, you might think 60-70 frames per second is great. Actually, it's a lot more stuttery than keeping it at 45, especially if you're not using motion reprojection. Talking of which, keep that off. I don't personally like this mode at all. I find it just doesn't really do anything apart from make everything really watery and horrible and wobbly. I'd rather use the reprojection available in either Steam VR or Pimax Play if it was working, or the SSW, which I'll go into as well. So yeah, switch that off, no good there. Wheel scale, I just find generally, apart from the Quest, 105 seems to work well for the Pimax headsets. For the Quest, I leave that at 100. NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency, that is basically your turbo mode in the OpenXR toolkit, so keep that on. Dynamic settings. This is something that I still feel isn't really working as well as it could. It is better now though, don't get me wrong. And if you are really struggling, then try this setting, because what it does is it will enable the sim to sort of dynamically change the detail of the sim based upon a target frame rate. And again, this would go hand in hand with your max frame rate. So make sure that you set these for the sort of, you know, similar values. I would recommend that. The only thing about dynamic settings is it tends to blur the ortho imagery, but it is something to play with, okay? For a 5090, don't need that, of course, but maybe for a low-end GPU, that would be useful. Terrain level of detail, that's your LOD. It's a bit different the way it behaves in MSFS 2024, because this is also attached to how the ortho imagery is displayed, and if it's too low, you might find you get some blurry images as well, and that's again linked to this dynamic setting, because it will take the LOD back to something like 50, and then suddenly your ortho imagery will be a bit blurry. So again, I wouldn't recommend anything lower in any computer system, actually, even if you're running a 1080 Ti. Kind of kidding there, but you know what I mean. Don't go any lower than 150. Personally, I like it above 200, maybe 225, around that sort of ballpark for a decent GPU. So off-screen terrain pre-caching, very good for, you know, VR headsets with a good field of view, but even with a Super, I find medium works okay. It is a bit of a heavy hitter, that one, so I wouldn't really, you know, go any higher than that. Displacement mapping, that is a really cool thing, you know. It's a very nice visual eye candy thing that shows, I think, you know, your sort of marks on the ground when you're sort of on a sandy strip or on a grass strip. It is a heavy hitter though, but for 5090 and 4090, that's okay, leave it on. But if you're finding that things are, you know, a bit low on the frame rate, that's one of the things you should take off. Buildings medium, trees is another one that's a heavy hitter in MSFS 2024. Don't be afraid to turn that down to low, you'll still get plenty of trees and you'll get a nice boost in performance. Okay, same with these, keep these low. I'm gonna crack on a bit here. Volumetric clouds, I don't actually think they look that great in 2024 and Ultra. They're a little bit strange with some of the way the volumetric clouds sort of display, and it can look a little bit pixelated weirdly. So, and it does take back a lot of your frames, up to about 5 frames or 7 frames per second actually with a 4070S. So take that to high. You could even change that to medium, but there is a big hit on visual fidelity, but you'll get a nice boost in performance. And to be honest, in general, clouds are one of those really heavy hitter type of settings. Texture resolution, really this is about your VRAM. You know, if you've got a decent amount of VRAM, I'm talking at least 16 gigs, probably more to be honest, you know, more like what a 4090 has, then stick this on Ultra. Otherwise, take that back to high, because otherwise you are going to run into stutters and maybe even crashes to desktop. And that's just because MSFS 2024 with a add-on airport, you know, high resolution as well, makes a big difference, and that VRAM will soon fill up. AF, well, in my personal opinion, and when I say 4070 Super, I'm also talking about the AMD equivalent of that card, which I'll put on the screen now because I can't remember offhand. I'm not that much of a anorak, but something along those lines. AF, I think, is totally fine with a modern card to have 16 times. I think some people get a bit too worried about that, but with a modern card, this type of filtering should be absolutely fine. Another way of doing it is turning this off and enabling it in your graphics card settings, in this case the NVIDIA app or whatever. Some people say it looks better that way. I've tested this and it looks the same for me, but there we go. Let's go down here. Usual stuff, shadow maps and contact shadows are not that well optimized, but unless you've got a really decent GPU, take this all the way back, guys, and switch this off, you know. I know it's going to hurt when you do it in the menu, but once you're flying, you're not going to really notice a difference, apart from the fact you're going to get better performance. Windshield effects is one where I personally prefer it high, but feel free to turn it down, although the difference between medium and high is a big deal. I don't think the setting is quite as incremental as it should be, really, with windshield effects, but it is very nice. But funny enough, when it rains, you will get a bit of a performance hit on that. Ambient occlusion is one of them that does affect performance in 2020, but not so much in 2024. So feel free to have a play around with that, and it does look good in the sim. Ray march reflections, I'd only turn that on, personally, if you've got a 5090 or 5080. Otherwise, turn it off, because it is a bit of a killer, but for 50 series cards, it can handle it much better. And let's just quickly talk about these ones here. In fact, that should be high, that one, I think, because this is a flight sim and cockpit gauges are probably one of the most important things, really, you know, more important than all the visual fidelity outside, because you want to make sure that your gauges are performing as they should. So I'll just mention these quick ones at the bottom here. Fauna, I would definitely recommend switching that off completely, really. Unless, again, you've got a very powerful GPU. It's just a drain on performance, and it's just a waste of time, really, most of the time. It is nice to see animals. I do enjoy seeing them around, but it is one of those settings where all those animals around, you know, in the countryside, I mean, they're very detailed as well. It just is not worth it, folks. Sea traffic, that's one that I don't find is too much of a heavy hitter. It depends on where you are, of course, but I do like to see all the ships and ferries, and generally speaking, because they're out to sea, it doesn't really affect performance too much, because by the time you get out to sea, you're not really showcasing so much of the auto imagery and all the detailed airports, so you kind of trade that for some sea traffic. That's my thinking anyway. And road traffic, annoyingly, it does hit performance quite badly on your CPU. So again, be careful with that. Same with air traffic control and traffic airport quality as well. But now I'm going to show you what I use for a 4070 Super base system running a 13700F base CPU. And this is what I'm using with a 13900K running a 4090. And finally, this is what I use with the 5090, and you've already seen it, but yeah, this is basically what I use. And as I say, before anyone comments below, yes, I can run VR on Ultra with a 5090. Yes, I absolutely can. It's a bit of a beast of a PC, but I still wouldn't recommend doing it because smoothness is way more important than a few extra puffy clouds. Let's now talk about DLSS. This is a really big deal for VR, especially as DLSS 4 with the transformer model, either preset J or K, really transforms the performance. I'm not kidding, folks. I've done videos on this, as you probably have seen. And the great thing is MSFS 2024 natively supports DLSS 4 now, so you don't have to mess around too much with swapping files and being a bit of a IT guru. Having said that though, there is ways in which to make sure that you are running the correct DLSS 4 driver and making sure that the preset is working correctly and you're getting the best possible image. So I would recommend really either running DLSS 4 on, not that one, performance or balanced. Because once you get to quality, the performance difference between TAA mode and DLSS 4 isn't really that big, and you're not really benefiting from that extra performance. Be fair, I do feel that balance is a nice sweet spot. I guess that's why it's called balanced. Now with that in mind, this is the DLSS swapper, which is a fantastic utility and very easy to use, and it ensures that you've got the latest DLSS 4 files. Obviously make sure your sim is not running like mine is when you're doing this. These are all the different versions, as you can see. Usually the top one is the best, generally speaking anyway, not always, but have a play around, see which one you prefer. But really version 3.10 I think are the ones that are DLSS 4, might be wrong there, but I'm currently running this one, and all you need to do is select swap and it'll download it, and that's it, job done. You can do it for different games as well, so you don't have to just use it for flight sims, you can use it for Truck Simulator, for Elite Dangerous, or you know, Cyberpunk, whatever you want. Also, it's good to use the NVIDIA app. Now, you can use the NVIDIA Inspector as well, but I am going to show the NVIDIA app for this one simply because it's the easiest way of doing it. So this is what I do, okay? Come down to program settings, MSFS 2024, and if we come down to the bottom here, DLSS override model presets. So click on that, and this top one here, click latest. Then go down one, and there you go. You've even got the options here, and I've got preset K and frame generation, which obviously doesn't work in VR anyway. And that's it. That's all you need to do. Or you can swap it to preset J and have a play around. But I would recommend J or K is excellent. And that is it, guys. That's it. It's so easy now. You just don't have to mess around with swapping files anymore. It's bloody brilliant. It really is. So let's now move on to the Pimax Play settings. Right, just booting up my Super here, and this is also applicable to the light. Basically, in the settings here, we've just got to make sure there's a few things correct. Now, with the light and the Super, you can also mess around with the refresh rate, which is amazing. It can go down that low, and if you're happy with it, and quite a lot of people are, I don't like it personally, it's a bit stroby for me, but for most people, they're happy with it. That's great. So for a 4070 Super, I would recommend just going for medium render quality, which is the same as, well, yeah, you can see here, 0.75. You don't even need to mess around with a customized thing. Just go straight to medium, job done. And it still looks really very nice. You could try with a 4070 Super or AMD equivalent, going to high and then using DLSS 4, but you are pushing things a bit there, okay? Don't try and run the Super in TAA mode, high render settings with a 4070 or something similar. It just is not worth it. Don't do it. In terms of the quad views, this needs to be off now because MSFS 2024 has native quad view support. So you don't need this on. Make sure that's off, as well as obviously this, because this is the fixed foveated rendering side of things. Take that off as well. In terms of smart smoothing, well, it depends if it's working by the time this goes live, but at the moment it's not working that great, so switch that off. This is where we'd normally lock to half refresh rate. Don't need to do that anymore. That's fine. And there's your colours and all sorts of things, not really applicable to performance. Make sure the OpenXR runtime is set to Pimax XR. Now for eye tracking, and again this is applicable to the OG Crystal, not the Lite, well, make sure that eye tracking is enabled. Don't have the auto IPD adjustment enabled because it doesn't really work that well personally. Just adjust that yourself here. And I also remove the wearing location reminder. I'd take that off as well because it's a bit annoying. But basically all you need for MSFS 2024 to detect eye tracking and use it for foveated rendering, just make sure that eye tracking is enabled and you're good to go there. I think that's basically it for this. Now, in terms of the OpenXR toolkit, all I'll say is, yes, it still works, and I sometimes use it for various things, such as post-processing effects. Say in the Crystal Super, if the colours are a little bit too washed out, you can dial them back, take the contrast down a bit, increase the saturation. That's what I've done, and it does make a bit of a difference. So you can, I think you can do some of that in here as well, but I just use the OpenXR toolkit. You can also use the OpenXR toolkit for fixed foveated rendering, but don't bother doing that because it's integrated to the sim and it works really well. And in each case, by the way, if you're wondering, I run the same settings here for each headset, because that's the thing that really kills your performance the most. And that's why I don't recommend anything other than medium, really, unless you're running a 4090, then go for high, but then use DLSS 4 ideally, or perhaps if you're running a 4090, dial this back to 85%, okay? If you're running a 5090, I'm not going to touch on this too much because I appreciate it's a very expensive card, you can run the Super at full native resolution, and yes, it's very, very nice. It's very nice, and yeah, it makes you smile. But it's great though that, you know, the Super allows you to dial it back to different settings. And while I'm at it as well, I don't really recommend the 90Hz upscaled mode. Sorry, 72Hz upscaled mode. I just think you lose too much quality. So let's now talk about the Quest 3. My personal favourite way of using it is virtual desktop, and my preferred codec is the AV1 10-bit codec. It is a little bit more hefty on frame rate, so if that's too much for you, you can always try the other ones. And if you have issues as well, because it can sometimes cause issues with certain GPUs. But for me, AV1 10-bit for all of my GPUs. And of course, I run VDXR, which is the OpenXR integration of virtual desktop. It is superb, folks. It is brilliant. And here now, I'll just show you what my settings are in the virtual desktop app. I use Godlike mode with the 4070S, as well as the 4090 and 5090. And these are my settings, which run really well. I do personally like the Snapdragon upscaling. For me, it just gives me a little bit more sharpness. Some people don't like it. They find it's a bit shimmery. That's fine, but have a play around with it, folks. Like I say, this is not the holy grail of VR settings. It's just what I do. That's all it is. It's just what I do, folks. There is also a new option in virtual desktop where you can take the field of view back a little bit, which is very cool, and it does make a difference, and in some cases can make the Quest 3 a little bit sharper because it's kind of squishing it, you know, into a more sort of smaller picture. So I wouldn't recommend going too crazy with this, otherwise you'll get black lines, but it does make a difference to performance. It's a very welcome addition. And in terms of refresh rate, I would recommend using 80 Hz at 40 frames per second, either using SSW, which is their motion reprojection technique, which I would highly recommend because it is absolutely stunning. And sometimes I'll actually pick the Quest 3 over any other VR headset when I'm doing sort of sightseeing tours because it is so smooth. You could also, though, if you're not going to use SSW, feel free to use a locked 45 frames per second, say at 90 Hz as well. If you'd like me to do a separate Quest 3 link settings, then I will do as a separate video. I don't tend to use link that much because virtual desktop is so amazing and it works so well. But I will say I do use the Oculus debug tool and turn the bit rate right up really very high, and it does look sharper admittedly, but I don't know, I just feel like it's more stable with virtual desktop, and of course you don't have any wires either, and the Quest 3 for me is all about being wireless. You know, it's a fantastic headset for that. And that is all I do these days, folks. Very simple. I think the only thing I could probably say in terms of your NVIDIA driver settings is, I can bloody find it again, I don't usually do it through here, is prefer maximum performance. Actually, it's probably down here somewhere. There it is. Yeah, so prefer maximum performance for your GPU. And that is it. In terms of GPU scheduling, that's HAGs. Definitely have that on. For me, it's, let's have a look here. GPU, just type in GPU, graphic settings, and there we are in Windows 11. You just switch it on there. That could be different for you though, so bear that in mind. But that's it, folks. Very simple. Things are a lot easier than they used to be, in my opinion. You don't have to go a bit mental with all the config files. I mean, you can go into this a lot more, and there are some YouTube videos out there that are fantastic at all that. If I remember, I'll leave a link to some of them that I like in the notes below. But that's all I do, folks, in terms of my VR settings. Sometimes keeping it simpler is definitely better, especially when this sim gets updated so much that by the time you've got all your config files set and everything, you spent 3 days doing it, suddenly there's a new update and you have to do them all over again. I don't really fancy that. These settings are what I call set and forget. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I hope it's been useful to you, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye for now.